Good afternoon, Patriots. This is State Representative Bill Zedler. Great to be with you today. Folks, let me ask you this. Have you gotten down from Cloud 9 yet? After a phenomenal election where the American people sent a message, and that message is this. We've tasted socialism, and we are spitting it out. I think that across the United States, we saw time and again where cases that should have been very close, or cases where they thought the Democrats were going to win, and they didn't. Here in the state of Texas, in the Tarrant County area, we elected a fine conservative senator, Connie Burton. She will be replacing Wendy Davis's seat. She beat a very hardcore liberal, Libby Willis, for that seat. And then in District 94, Tony Tinderholt beat a very, very liberal person who was running for the state rep seat in District 94 as a Democrat, Cole Baldwin. We saw across the board where the Democrats in the state of Texas did not want to be identified as Democrats. They were identifying themselves as pro-business, conservatives, that kind of thing.
Bill, I was out at the polling locations, and a number of the Democrats were campaigning as conservatives.
Exactly.
I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I asked them, because at several of the races I knew their opponent, and I said, now, wait a second. Now, are y'all Republican or Democrat? And I had one guy tell me, he says, well, we're conservative Democrats.
Friends, let me tell you, there are no conservative Democrats. Let me give you an example. Paula Pearson Hightower ran as a pro-business Democrat, and this was a couple of sessions ago. And when the business community got through ranking and rating all the state reps and all the senators, do you know where Paula Pearson ranked as far as her business votes were concerned? Well, out of 181 state House members and state senators, Paula Pearson ranked 181. Dead bottom. And this is what they do. They try and run based on a tag like that, when the fact of the matter is, guess what? They are liberal Democrats, and there are no pro-business Democrats. I mean, I guess that means they don't want to completely take over the private sector. They want to leave it in the hands of private individuals. The problem is, my friends, as Ronald Reagan said, what does it matter if they have the title to your business or not, if they have the power of life and death over it? Yeah. And time and again, that's what we've seen. For instance, Cole Baldwin, he claimed to be the same thing, a pro-business Democrat. He supported Obamacare. Now, what do we see time and again in the private sector? What is the National Federation of Independent Businessmen doing? They were suing the federal government to stop the implementation of Obamacare. Why? Because it is absolutely destructive to the business sector. What we know is this is what's forcing a lot of these businesses to stop hiring full-time employees and moving more and more towards part-time employees. Why? Because they can't afford the cost of paying for either paying the fine or paying the high cost of the health care that they're seeing under Obamacare. The deal is that while we were promised a $2,500 reduction in the cost of health care a year, what did we get? A $2,500 increase in the cost of health care.
Well, at least they got the $2,500 number right.
Yeah, they had the number right. They just didn't know whether it was a plus or a minus, right?
It's the new math.
That's right. The new math. It was Common Core math that they were using to figure that out. So
Well, Bill, let me ask you this: what what can we expect to see going forward? Not just on the state level. I know that's usually what we focus here on, but we had a clean sweep across the federal level too.
Exactly.
Didn't
Exactly.
we? These next 2 years, I mean, we were just talking about it before the show. It's almost a race to 2016 because we cannot. This is not the end of the Obama era.
Exactly.
We still got 2 years left of this.
Exactly. Well, I think, Josh, part of it is how effective both John Boehner and Mitch McConnell are in, first of all, carrying the message, and then effectively getting legislation up, voting on it, and then if they take it up to Obama and he vetoes it, then what they need to do is come back to see if they can override the veto. And then forcing those Democrats to take a vote. And see, that was one of the problems we were facing before. With Harry Reid as the majority leader, he would never even bring those issues up for a vote. And so a lot of these Democrats were able to run from the voting record because there wasn't a voting record. So what we want to do is on key issues that dealing with Obamacare, key issues dealing with new energy exploration, whether it's the pipeline or whether it's the Democrats' war on coal. Make these Democrats take a vote. And you know what I believe will happen? If we make them take a vote, some of those Democrats will start voting with us. You know why? Because they know how unpopular this president's positions are. And so if we do that, I would love to see us start overriding some of those Obama vetoes. But what the other thing is this, Josh, we've got to continue to hammer away and make the American people understand what are the principles that have made this country the greatest country in the world. We need to basically articulate these two views, one for free enterprise, the other is government-run top-down policies. One is limit the size of government and why. And the other is big government. And, of course, with big government, you've got high taxes. With small government, you have lower taxes. And then we need to explain over and over and over again that message, why our position on those issues is better than the big government top-down policies. Now, here's the thing we got to remember, friends. Some Republicans like big government just as much as the Democrats do. They simply want to control where that money goes. Mm-hmm. They want to have it going to their friends as opposed to the Democrats sending it to theirs. And so that's why it's important that first of all, when we go to them, that we send a message. We want free enterprise reigning, not government run. It's just like in the healthcare industry. For some time now, the government has been messing it up, and then when they'd kind of fouled it up and made it bad, guess what happened? Then you gave Obama an excuse to bring in Obamacare. Now, what we need to remember this. You can go all the way back to the 1950s and know that the Democrats have been pushing socialized medicine since way back then. The deal is the American people wouldn't swallow it. But then they made the situation bad enough by some of these government policies that then people began to think, well, okay, we need the government doing something. Well, I'll tell you what we don't need. We don't need the government taking over the healthcare industry. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is we have won a great victory on this last Tuesday. But what we cannot do is stop being engaged. We've got to learn the principles that have made this country the greatest country in the world. Then we need to push those principles and go and talk to our U.S. congressmen, U.S. senators, and say, these are the principles that made us the greatest country in the world. This is why we want you to start carrying those principles into legislation so that we can get it done. Now, the same thing is true down here in Texas. We need to continue to keep the pressure on the people you've elected as your U.S. Or as your state representatives and your state senators. Make sure you articulate to them a message, because let me tell you, friends, there will be plenty of people down there talking about why we got to spend money here, spend money there, and what we got to do is look and see where, no, here's what we need to do. We need to look at the core responsibilities of government and make sure those are funded appropriately. One of the things I think that we're going to have to do this next session is make sure that money from the sale of automobiles and cars is dedicated to transportation. When I'm talking about transportation, I'm talking about highways. I am not talking about rail. I'm not talking about bike paths. I'm talking about highways. And if we do that, we'll have some more dedicated funds. And then the other thing we need to do is make sure we stop diverting money that is being collected, for highways, and make sure it's not being diverted, and make sure it's being spent for highways. And then finally, we need to make sure that the money that the TxDOT is given is spent efficiently. So I think those are the things we need to do to hold our elected officials accountable. And I think one of the things we can do this next time is make sure that we have a Speaker of the House that represents the viewpoints of the people of Texas.
Do you have anybody in particular in mind?
Well, yeah, Josh, I'm glad you bring that up. My choice for the Speaker of the House is Scott Turner. And the reason why Scott Turner is, first of all, Scott Turner is a ex-professional football player. He's someone, when you listen to his life story, you find someone who's really overcome a lot of challenges. But this guy is someone who has been able to overcome those things. He has a real charismatic personality. But most of all, Scott Turner has a deep faith in God, and he also understands the principles that have made this country the greatest country in the world, and that's what he's really committed to doing. He's committed to taking those principles, moving them forward, making sure that those principles are allowed to get to the floor. My friends, I can't tell you the number of real great issues that if we could have gotten done last time would significantly benefit the state of Texas. But they were never allowed out of committee. And so one of the things that Scott will do, here's what you got to remember is this. A lot of people, when they were hearing from Joe Straus before, one of the things they heard was, we're going to have a member-led House. In other words, we're going to have a House that's listening to the membership and allowing legislation that the majority of the members want. They want to vote for. But you know what? What we saw under Joe Straus was a concentration of power. In other words, under Tom Craddock, who was the Speaker of the House in the 03, 05, and 07 session, we saw a dissemination of power. We saw power, for instance, let me give you an example. If you were committee chair, you would not be able to get on the calendars committee. The calendars committee is the committee that determines when a piece of legislation gets to the floor. They can decide to have that legislation to the floor in 3 days, or they can have decided to have that legislation get to the floor the 12th of never. And so if you have committee chairs who already have a lot of power, because in the committee they already have the power of life and death over any particular legislation that comes through their committee, now by putting them on the calendars committee, you've given them more power. Well, guess what Joe Straus did? He started concentrating that power in the hands of those people who initially joined up with him. They're Charlie Guerin, Byron Cook, those guys, and what it boils down to is they also then get to be on the calendars committee, and so then what happens is that they're committee chair, they have the power there, and then they get in the calendars committee, and they even have more power. And so what we want to do is have a Speaker of the House that is committed to getting principles, first of all, to the floor that made this country the greatest country in the world. Second of all, that is listening to the members of the House. Let's get in that legislation to the floor. Let me give you a few prime examples of that. First of all, we had the limit the growth of government to population plus inflation. Now, every time you take that before a primary election, put it on the ballot in the primary elections of Republicans, guess what? That proposal gets 94% of the vote. Yet, that legislation couldn't even get out of committee. Another one was that we eliminate the state franchise tax. When the state franchise tax was passed, we were told that, boy, it'd be easy to do and it was going to be fair. Well, we found it was everything but that. When we first passed it, it was designed to replace the sales tax. The property tax. What had happened was the property tax around the state was roughly $1.50 per hundred for school districts. Almost all the school districts were at that. There was a cap. And the Supreme Court had said that represents a statewide property tax, which is unconstitutional. So they said it has to be changed. And so in order to lower that tax, they lowered it down from $1.50 to $1. What they wanted to do was bring in a franchise tax that was more equitable. In other words, instead of just small corporations paying the tax, you'd expect bigger corporations to pay the same thing. Make sure that Walmart and those guys were also paying the tax. And so what it did was effectively eliminate the Delaware loophole. Well, that's what it was supposed to do, but in practice, it didn't do all that well. The other thing is, one of the things I don't like about the tax is that, again, you have some people able to get away from not paying it. The other thing is that even if you lose money, you have to pay the tax. And so I think that all that does is it really stifles the business sector. I would much rather us get away from that where we chiefly relying on sales tax. And I think we can leave the sales tax as it is if we will decide we're going to limit the growth of government to population plus inflation. And then take the money we have and use that to meet the needs of the state without growing government. The other thing is, I'm convinced that there are some sectors that we can make more efficient. And that's what we ought to do. And so live within our means, not seek, quote, that's one of the other things you see. They always, we got to find new ways to raise revenue. No, we don't. Because if you're taking money from the private sector, remember this, it is the private sector that creates wealth. It is the private sector that creates jobs. And when you take more money from the private sector, you're stifling the private sector's ability to create wealth and to create those jobs. What we found is this. If you look at, compare us to California, they'll tell you, we got to have those high taxes because we got to have things that benefit the poor. Do you know there's a study out now that shows that the poor do better in the state of Texas with our lower taxes than they do in California with their higher taxes? And so let's remember this. It is a free enterprise, private sector that creates wealth. It creates jobs. Let's start moving and making sure that we don't rob from the goose that's laying the golden egg. Okay? One of the other things I think we ought to discuss is this, is that, there's going to be something done on immigration. Now, my personal opinion is, based on all the evidence I see, that the message needs to be, look, we want the borders secured, period. It's not, look, we will secure your borders, and at the same time, we're going to give everybody that's here, we're going to let them all stay. I think that's the wrong message. Because if we decided today that we were going to secure the borders, we're not going to be able to secure the borders tomorrow. And I'll tell you what I believe would happen. As soon as we said we're going to secure the borders and effective on this date, after that, if you were here before that time, then you get to stay. Let me ask you this. What evidence are we going to rely on that they were here before? Are we going to rely on, oh, gee, they paid an electric bill. Oh, gee, they paid a, whatever. I guarantee you know what I think is going to happen? There will immediately be a cottage industry coming up to falsify that information. They will be looking at ways to create electric bills because, here's the thing. How do we know who these people are? And I'll give you an example. When we've seen these unaccompanied minors get across the border and they give the Border Patrol agent a note, this is my father or this is my mother or my uncle or whatever. I want to go stay with him. Do you know that there is absolutely zero verification to make sure that is the case? Listen, for all we know, the person we're delivering this individual to is nothing more than someone dealing in sex trafficking, someone dealing in drugs, or whatever. Do you realize, did you hear about the school in Massachusetts that they were letting in people who were applying for school there who claimed to be 17 years old, and they said, these people had gray hair, they had wrinkles. Let me tell you, if that's a 17-year-old, they lived one heck of a hard life down there, whatever country they came from.
It's worse than we even thought it was.
That's right. So, in other words, what evidence do we have of anything they tell us? What evidence do we have of their age? What evidence do we have that they were here? I mean, what prevents them from...
Okay, the nut job liberals
yes.
have had their way for 6 years in America.
Exactly.
And we're seeing women get their heads cut off by Sharia law. I heard last week a guy's getting his head kicked around like a soccer ball around New York City. They thought it was a Halloween prank until they found out it was actually some dude's head.
That was a real head there.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing women and children and God knows who else is coming across our border. Okay, now we've got a new opportunity here. What are some real common sense, grown-up type decisions that can be made, Bill? What if you were governor, if you were a state representative, let's say,
right?
What would you propose we do about first of all, our border situation,
right,
and then about these people, the gray-haireds going to elementary or high school or whatever?
Exactly. I think here's the thing. I talked to a Border Patrol agent. You know what they said? There's only one solution to this. First of all, 100% retention. In other words, this idea of catch and release and say, hey, listen, we want you to report back to this court in 9 months when we have time to adjudicate your particular deal, and we want you to come back in 9 months, report to this court on this date. Excuse me, that was stop. So 100% retention. Second thing is that I believe we have 100% deportation. In other words, if you're caught at the border, the one guarantee in life is you will be sent back to the country in which you came. If you come here saying, listen, I'm escaping violence down there, I'm escaping some horrible condition down there, you know what? We're going to take you back to your country of origin. We're going to show you where the American embassy is. And then you can apply for asylum. But you know what? You're not going to wait here. And we'd be far better off to simply give them a small amount of money up front and say, here's more money than you've ever seen before in your life, but you're not going to stay in this country. And then while they're there, then they can apply, if they want to apply for asylum. The other thing is, Josh, I think we've basically got to enforce our current immigration laws. And first of all, do you realize that since January this year, we have apprehended the DPS, the Border Patrol, they have apprehended people from 140 different countries here in the state of Texas. They've apprehended people from 140 different. I mean, a lot of people in their mind think, well, this is some poor soul from Mexico or from El Salvador or something like that. No, my friends, we're getting people in from Somalia. We're getting in people from China. We're getting in people from all across the globe. And some of these people that are coming in, they're coming from countries that want to kill us. The other thing is that this so many of these diseases. Have you noticed this E-virus that they had, and it was prevalent right up in the summer? I haven't read much on it in the last month or two, but guess what? We have had a few children die from that virus. And when they said, where did it come from? Well, there are some countries in Central and South America where that is very prevalent. So by having these open borders, we're running a risk of Americans dying. And the other thing is this: the DPS has been tracking every time a criminal illegal alien is booked in a Texas jail. They started doing that in October of 2008, and the results they came out with are up through the beginning of summer of this year. In that period of time, in Texas jails, they have booked 206,000 individual illegal aliens who committed a total of 630,000 crimes, including 3,000 murders and 8,000 sexual assaults. A lot of this has come to light recently when you had the Border Patrol agent who was out on a picnic with his family and was murdered by 2 illegal aliens who had been deported numerous times. How about the little girl in Parker County who was molested by an illegal alien who had been deported 4 times? Do you know that you're deported once, that is a misdemeanor. The second time you come in, that, my friends, is a felony. How about the illegal alien that murdered the 2 police officers in California? My friends, the people who have failed to secure our borders, the blood of those people murdered are on their hands. And what we've got to do is say, you know what, we're sorry. We're going to treat people very humanely, but we're going to secure our borders. We're going to enforce our immigration laws. The other thing I would do is I believe we need to pass that no city in the state of Texas will grant sanctuary status to those people who are here illegally. We need to shut off some of the benefits to those people who are here illegally. In other words, there will be no in-state tuition. That doesn't mean that they can't go to Tarrant County College if somehow they don't find them or whatever. But, if they're here illegally, they should not get in-state tuition. Because here's the thing a lot of people may lose track of. There are just so many seats that they allow into the University of Texas, Texas A&M, all these major universities. There are just so many people that they allow in. What do we say to the child of a U.S. citizen, a legal resident of the state of Texas, if we allow an illegal alien to knock them out of going to the University of Texas and then have their tuition funded by the taxpayers of Texas? I think that is wrong. No, Josh, one of the things I see is too often they don't ever ask the question, how does this affect current U.S. citizens. And the other thing is, they never ask, what do we say to those people who have faithfully been waiting in line to come here legally, who have waited 2, 3, 4, and 5 years? There are hundreds of thousands of those people who are waiting in line to come here legally. What do we say to them if we allow people who've gotten here illegally to stay? I think the message is abundantly clear. You were fools. And I do not believe that is right. Now, a lot of people want to say, well, how about the people who are here illegally? You know what? I think that the message needs to be, you need to do like everybody else has done. You need to wait in line. And it really irritated me when I heard Jeb Bush say that to come here illegally was an act of love. My friends, when you hear leaders in America make those kinds of, I think, reckless statements, what happens is that then that encourages more people to come here illegally. And when that happens, what we know is a lot of these women that are trying to come here illegally, they're raped along the way. A lot of the men are assaulted along the way. A lot of these women who think they're coming here to be a domestic help or something like that, when they get involved in the drug cartel, all of a sudden they realize, no. This isn't to be domestic help. This isn't to work in a restaurant somewhere. This is to be a sex slave somewhere. Is that what we would call an act of love? I don't think so. But I think that is exactly the kind of behavior we're rewarding when we encourage people to come here illegally by calling it an act of love. I think that's reckless, and I think it's irresponsible. So I think the fair thing to do is to go to our elected representatives and say, ask them some questions and encourage them. We want our borders secured, period. We should not have to wait for anything else other than to have our borders secured. And it's not to say that there may be some people that we need in the agricultural industry or something like that. That's fine. We can look at that. But until that time, we need to say we're securing our borders and we're enforcing the law. Friends, it's great been talking to you today. Josh, do you have anything to add? Oh, okay. My friends, you have a great day. Great being here with you, and see you next week.